Her true story from Illinois. They said, "You're just counting days," and refused to share cake, so I bought a lakefront condo and cut them from my will. They celebrated without me. I planned without them. I approached the kitchen table with a careful step, folding my hands in front of me, afraid the linoleum would creak and betray my presence. 75 years on this earth, and 3/4 of a century's worth of careful politeness and patience had taught me to enter quietly. I glanced at the cake, a towering confection of vanilla frosting swirled with pink roses, topped with a golden 75. It looked decadent and untouched. I took a deep breath. Just as my fork hovered over the nearest slice, I heard it. Tina's voice, loud and dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, Grandma, why don't you let the kids enjoy it? You're just counting your days anyway." A ripple of laughter followed. Children's plates were whisked past me. Adults turned toward their seats again, eyes shining with amusement at her boldness. It was as though my 80 years of living had been reduced to mere numbers. My life brushed off as disposable. I froze. No one reached out a hand or offered me a seat at the table. No one offered to cut me a slice or even pause the party song for a moment. It wasn't even a smart quip. It was spiteful, thoughtless, empty cruelty wrapped in stale birthday cake. The room was bright, full of voices and balloons. Yet in that moment, I felt a shadow nestle around me, pulling me away from laughter and family sing-alongs, guiding me into a place I hadn't visited since my husband died, feeling invisible. I stood there, unwilling to speak, unwilling to protest. I felt a flush creep up my neck, and when I looked down, my hands were shaking. My life savings had gone into this house, into these walls, and yet here I was, treated like an extra, a decoration without purpose. The laughter died down. 3-year-olds laughed at each other. The younger adults leaned in to retell the same old stories. "Remember when Aunt Shelley dyed our hair?" But no one spoke to me. I stopped expecting happy birthday or even a nod of acknowledgement. I wasn't even granted that dignity. And then they started singing happy birthday. Children belted out off-key lyrics. The cake's candles glowed precariously. Half of me wanted to blow them out and retreat. The other half, a much smaller part, wanted to stand there and demand respect, but I didn't. I took a small plate from the stack they had reserved for my grandchildren. Oh, the irony. Then carried it through the circle into the kitchen, where the noise dimmed behind me. I didn't even pause to wipe away the tremor in my fingers as they pressed the slice into a paper plate. I slipped into the small room they had set up for me. It was meant to be a cozy guest room, but felt more like a cell. The furniture was slight, the space deliberate, removed. Paint marks from their children's art overlapped on the walls, a mural that begged the question, where am I in this picture? I sat on the edge of the narrow twin bed. The bedspread was floral pastel. I smoothed its wrinkles gently before placing the plate beside me. I stared at the cake, perfect icing, untouched fruit, and around it the words, "Celebrating Grandma." It felt hollow. Silence settled in the room like dust. Distant laughter, clinking dishes, voices floating up from the main floor. But this room contained something else, presence, my presence. I sipped my iced tea, trying to swallow the lump in my throat, trying not to cry. I thought back to the first time I ever baked a cake for them. It was 30 years ago. My husband was alive, and my arms weren't trembling. I had pulled out all the stops, triple-layer chocolate with creamy peanut butter frosting. They had devoured it, begged for seconds, praised the flavor. It tasted like love then. Now, it tasted like regret. I looked at the balloon bouquet outside the door. "Happy 75th, Grandma," it mocked me. They had glued sugar-coated words on a helium bundle. They had waited until I was the topic of jokes before celebrating me. I folded the napkins on my lap, pressing a dime-sized dot of powdered sugar into the crease. I wondered if it would dissolve in the next rainstorm, disappear like I felt. A quiet knock tapped on the door. Emily, my granddaughter, peeked in, concern shading her eyes. "Nan, are you okay?" she asked softly. She held 2 forks. I looked at that plate in front of me, my solitary piece of cake, and then at Emily's small, empathetic face. "I'm fine, sweetie," I replied quietly. "Go on, have fun." Emily lingered, her chest tight, like she wanted to say more but was stifled by the same tension that choked me. She put the cake back, retrieved her fork, and exited with a swift slam. I closed my eyes. The door clicked shut. The voices faded but did not disappear. They didn't need to. They had achieved their purpose. I had been made small, and their laughter laid the foundations. I walked to the window that overlooked the backyard. Their laughter produced shadows that danced against a lawn grown wild, in places I once kept tidy. The birthday banner they had strung across the fence looked like a cruel promise. I walked slowly to the small closet, pulled out my evening coat, and draped it over my arm. I carried my paper plate down the hallway, through the kitchen, past the cluster of guests who paused to say, "Happy birthday," then found my purse and slipped outside. The cool spring air greeted me. The wind teased at my coat. I inhaled it. They celebrated without me. They had no idea. I walked down the drive without hesitation, without tears. I kept the paper plate in my purse unopened as a reminder of what they offered me, crumbs. In my car, I didn't cry. I didn't want approval or acknowledgement. I turned the engine on and drove away. The engine's hum replaced their laughter. I drove far from that house. The road stretched quiet and empty. Somewhere, I thought I'd see a sign that said, "Life still begins here." I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I was leaving. At some point, my spark reignited. The small voice whispered, "You deserve more than cake. You deserve respect." I didn't look back. There is a kind of memory that lives not in photographs or journals, but in the worn-down soles of shoes, in the ink stains on a checkbook, in the calluses on your fingers from opening too many jars no one thanked you for. After my husband Harold passed, it was just me. I was 62, a widow, a quiet woman with a modest pension and decades of paperwork knowledge from working behind the counter at the First Midwest Bank. My house became too quiet, too clean, but it was mine. A 4-bedroom, 2-bath colonial that Harold and I had spent 30 years paying off, repainting, repairing. Every nail in that house had a name, a purpose, and I knew all of them by heart. It was that home they came to first when trouble knocked. When my son Robert lost his job at 44, he came to stay with me. I welcomed him with a warm bed and covered his mortgage for nearly 8 months. Not once did I complain. I simply reminded myself this is what mothers do. When Tina, my granddaughter, the same Tina who laughed at me over birthday cake, applied to college, her parents said they could not manage the tuition gap. I took out a second loan against the house. I remember telling myself, it's just money. You can't take it with you. I clipped coupons. I stopped going to the beauty salon. I wore the same coat for 6 winters. I skipped birthday gifts for myself and sent grocery cards to Tina every finals week. They called sometimes, said thank you, but eventually, even the thank yous faded into silence. And when Robert remarried, his new wife did not want to raise children in a house that still bore the smell of my perfume and the imprint of my lace curtains. She wanted new, modern, larger closets. I said nothing. I sold the house. I'll just move into the guest room at Tina's until I find something smaller, I told myself. But that guest room became permanent, and slowly, my presence shifted from guest to burden. They didn't ask how I was sleeping. They didn't notice when I skipped dinner because the noises and jokes were too loud. They didn't think twice when I started washing my own laundry in the sink, just to avoid the scolding about using too much water. They thought of me as part of the wallpaper, something that was always there and didn't require acknowledgement. But that house they lived in? I helped with the down payment. That car Tina drives to work in? I co-signed the loan when she was 21. That new kitchen they brag about? I used part of my retirement account to install it while they were on vacation. And yet, when I asked for a chair near the fire last Christmas, I was told, "Grandma, that's where the dog sits." It was a few days after my birthday when I pulled out the old folders I kept in a locked chest. There were bank records, letters, old copies of property deeds. I had learned early in my career, never throw away a paper with your name on it. One document in particular caught my eye. The deed transfer from my old house. I had sold it and quietly placed the proceeds, what was left after paying everyone's debts, into an account I never touched, one they did not know existed. I stared at the number. It wasn't much, but it was mine. My entire life had been a stream of small sacrifices, made without announcement, made without conditions, but somewhere along the way, they stopped seeing them as gifts. They became expectations, entitlements. A woman who gave without question became the woman who had no boundaries. And now they denied me cake? They denied me dignity? I closed the folder. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the window in my tiny room, watching the streetlight flicker against the hedge I once trimmed myself. I remembered my husband's voice. "You're the strongest woman I know, Mildy, but even strong people need to be treated right." He had said that when I stayed late at work after a robbery shook the branch. I repeated it aloud, just to hear it in the air. Even strong people need to be treated right. No one had treated me right in a long time, and suddenly I knew something. I didn't have to explain my goodness. I didn't have to beg for their respect. I didn't even have to ask them to see me. I had already given more than enough. The real question was, what would I do with what I had left? Some wounds do not bleed. They happen in silence, between dinner plates, behind closed doors, in the quiet erasure of a name. After the birthday party, nothing changed. If anything, the cold got quieter. Meals became moments I was never invited to. No one ever said, "Dinner's ready, Grandma," or asked if I preferred peas or carrots. They just ate, laughed, talked about their days. Tina posted her photos on Instagram of her family meals, where I was never in frame. And when they were done, when plates were scraped clean and wine glasses rinsed, I would hear a knock at my door. Or sometimes not even that. Just find a bowl of cold rice or a single slice of meatloaf left on the counter. No note, no warmth. I began calling them the nameless meals. I ate them alone, by the kitchen window, sometimes with a napkin, sometimes with just my hands. They never asked how my day went. I suppose they thought I had nothing to say. After all, what could an old woman possibly contribute? There were no photos of me in the living room. Not on the mantel, not on the refrigerator. There were photos of baby showers, graduation ceremonies, beach vacations, but none with me. Even the Christmas card from last year? I took the picture. They never asked me to be in it. At first, I tried not to mind. I told myself, "You're not vain. You don't need to be in pictures to matter." But then one day when a neighbor visited, she looked at the wall and asked Tina, "Where's your grandmother?" Tina just shrugged and said, "She likes to keep to herself." No one corrected her. No one said I was in the next room. No one brought me out to say hello. I was there, folding laundry. I had heard every word. One afternoon, I walked past the living room as my great-grandson Jordan played video games with a school friend. He must have been 10 or 11, too old to be so cruel, too young to realize the weight of what he was saying. The friend asked, "Who's that in the hallway?" Jordan replied, "That's just my grandma. She's old. She doesn't even remember much anymore." They both laughed. I turned and went back to my room. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the drawer next to my bed, pulled out the navy blue journal I had kept since moving in, and began to write. Today I became invisible, not because I vanished, but because they decided I was no longer worth seeing. I started writing more. Every night, under the light of a dim lamp, I recorded what I had cooked, what I overheard, what I remembered from years gone by. Sometimes I wrote about Harold, about the time he surprised me with a picnic in the middle of February, just because I had mentioned missing summer. Sometimes I wrote about Robert as a boy, how he used to bring me daisies from the neighbor's yard and claim they were stolen love gifts. And sometimes I just wrote down the things they said to me, not to be bitter, but to remember that I wasn't making it up, that it had happened, that this erasure was real. One entry read, "Maybe don't say goodnight anymore. I say it to myself now." Another, "They threw out my knitting bag, said it was clutter. It had my wedding shawl in it." And one night, after another quiet dinner of leftovers and laughter from a room away, I wrote, "Is this what it means to be a burden? To exist but without presence?" I tried to leave notes, little reminders that I was still a person. I folded their towels and left a smiley face drawn on a sticky note. No one said thank you. I made muffins one morning and left them on the table. They were eaten. But when I came back in, someone had thrown away the tin with a napkin still inside. No one asked if they were from me. No one thought to. That night, I wrote the hardest line of all. I live in this house, but I don't belong to this family anymore. And that truth echoed louder than any birthday song they never sang for me, because it was not about cake. It was not about chairs at a table or pictures on the wall. It was about something deeper, something crueler. I had given them my years, my money, my back, my love. But now I was a ghost, living, breathing, and somehow no longer real to them. And for the first time, I asked myself a question I had never dared to ask. Do I still want to be here? Not just in this house, but in this version of my life. Because I had a name. I had stories. I had a voice that still remembered songs and poems, and the exact color of the hydrangeas Harold planted on our 3rd anniversary. And maybe, just maybe, it was time someone else heard it. Someone who would not laugh, or shush, or turn away. Someone who would say, "Tell me again, Mildred. I never liked secrets." But some things are too sacred to be shouted. Some choices bloom best in silence. After that night, after my journal page stained with the words, "I live in this house, but I don't belong to this family anymore," I woke up with a strange stillness in my chest. Not sadness, not even anger, just a kind of clear knowing. It was time. They had forgotten, but I had not. I still held one final piece of my life before the burden. A property in Springfield, just a strip of land, nothing glamorous, but mine. It was the land Harold and I bought back when we were young and dreaming of building a vacation cabin. Life took us elsewhere. The cabin never came. But the land stayed. I had refused to sell it even when things got tight after Harold died. Now, I called the number of an old contact, a real estate agent named Louise who had handled the place for years. "Still holding on to that lot, Mildred?" she asked. "Not anymore," I said. The paperwork took 2 weeks. I signed documents at the local cafe so no one would notice if I came and went. I smiled politely to the notary public and didn't flinch when she asked if I had family who might help with the process. "No, this one's all me." When the sale closed, I opened a new bank account under my name only. The total came to $350,000, 0 cents. I stared at the balance on the screen and whispered, "Hello, old friend." It was the largest amount I had seen in my name in over a decade. It was not revenge, it was reclamation. I went online that same night. On the old tablet my granddaughter had tossed aside months ago, saying, "It's too slow to bother with." It worked just fine. I looked at properties across the state line. Quiet towns, lakefront condos, places where people still said good morning to strangers. I found it by accident, a 2-bedroom unit in Michigan, overlooking a calm patch of water that caught the sun just right in the photos. Wooden floors, French doors, a balcony just big enough for a rocking chair. I called. A man named Ethan answered. He sounded surprised that I wasn't calling for my adult children. "No," I told him, "I'm buying this one for myself." His tone shifted. "That's rare," he said. "I like that." I paid in full. No loans, no co-signers, no explanations, just my name on every line. The next morning, I began packing. Quietly, no cardboard boxes, just my suitcase from 1982 and a few reusable grocery bags. It didn't take much. A few dresses, my photo albums, the journal, Harold's watch, my shawl. Everything else they had already claimed or discarded without asking. The day before I left, I made one last meal, a roast chicken. I left it in the fridge with a note, "Take care, I won't be needing leftovers anymore." Then, at 2:14 a.m., I ordered a taxi. I didn't wait for sunrise. I didn't tell anyone goodbye. I stepped into the back seat, placed my suitcase beside me, and for the first time in years, closed the door, without feeling like someone might pull me back. The car pulled away from the curb. No one noticed. No one chased. They had celebrated without me. I had planned without them. As the taxi turned onto the highway, the lights of the house vanished behind a curve. I didn't look back. Instead, I pulled a small piece of cake from my purse, the one I had hidden after Tina's birthday party. A thin, dry slice with too much frosting. I had wrapped it in a napkin and tucked it away, not out of spite, out of reminder. I unwrapped it now, under the soft hum of the taxi, and took a bite.
It wasn't sweet, it was something else.
A memory, a promise, a reclamation. I swallowed, leaned back into the seat and chuckled, a sound that startled even me. The driver looked in the mirror and raised an eyebrow. "Everything okay back there?" I nodded slowly, then said it aloud, savoring every syllable. "Let them eat cake." Christmas used to be my favorite holiday, not for the gifts, not even for the carols or the lights, but for the warmth, the feeling that, for just one day, the world paused its cynicism and remembered how to be kind. This year, I celebrated in silence, and it was the most peaceful Christmas I had in decades. I heard nothing from them, not in the weeks leading up to the holidays, not on the day itself. They did not know I had left, not really. They may have noticed my bedroom door staying shut, or that the leftover roast was gone, or perhaps that my shawl was missing from the hook by the stairs. But people rarely notice what's not loudly taken. They assume presence, until it disappears. From my new condo, the snow fell in elegant silence, touching the lake like a secret it could not hold. I spent the morning wrapped in a thick blanket, sipping peppermint tea on the balcony. The neighbor across the hall, Mrs. Carter, a retired literature professor, brought over cranberry muffins and asked if I liked Emily Dickinson. We read aloud to each other, two strangers who had decided not to be lonely. In the evening, I watched It's a Wonderful Life for the 20th time, and for the first time I realized I was not Mary, I was George. Someone who gave and gave until they forgot they existed outside of giving. But now, I remembered, and it was enough. Back in Illinois, I imagine it took a while. I was no longer useful, no longer pouring coffee or folding towels or replacing paper towels no one noticed were ever gone. But Christmas morning arrived, and they noticed. No one had bought my gift. They never did. But my absence made wrapping their own feel unfinished. Tina asked where I was, maybe with a flicker of concern or guilt. My son might have muttered something like, "She probably went to visit her sister," forgetting that my sister passed away 6 years ago. Eventually, they called, that I had changed my number, and when the voicemail replied, "This number is no longer in service," I like to think they paused, not out of fear, but confusion, because people like me, they expect us to always be there, holding the camera, passing the plates, laughing at jokes made at our expense. We are supposed to be the furniture of family, until one day, we are not. A week after Christmas, I mailed them a postcard. Just one. No return address. Just the picture of my lake, calm, snow-dusted, and gently golden under the winter sun. The message was short. I found warmth where no one laughs at my age. Mildred. I do not know how they reacted, whether they read it aloud, or folded it quietly and tucked it away like a mistake they could not undo. I only know that no one came looking. No knock at the door. No apology. No plane ticket. They had built a home that ran perfectly without me, until it didn't. But rather than confront that truth, they left the postcard on the kitchen table, next to unopened coupons and old grocery lists. It stung them, I hope, not to punish, but to remind that love is not a resource to be mined until dry. It is a gift that must be honored, or it will vanish, quietly, like I did. My new mornings began with the sound of the lake tapping gently at the rocks. There was no shouting, no footsteps stomping past my bedroom door, no one sighing when I asked a question, no phones buzzing with texts that said, "Grandma needs something again." Just light, golden, warm, silent light that spilled through my window, as if the lake itself had chosen to greet me. I had not lived alone in 47 years, and yet I had never felt more accompanied. The condo was small, just 2 rooms and a modest balcony, but every inch of it was mine. I'd bought it furnished, but spent hours choosing new curtains, a ceramic teapot, and a set of watercolor brushes I had no idea how to use, yet. My first week, I baked blueberry scones and left them by the front desk for the building staff. A young woman named Janelle from the front office knocked that afternoon just to say, "You made my morning better." I almost cried over a sentence I had not heard in so long. People spoke to me here, not as if I were invisible, not like I was a memory already fading, but like I mattered. I met George on my 3rd evening while watching the lake turn silver beneath a fading sky. He had white hair, a soft flannel jacket, and a cane he refused to use unless someone made him. "Wife passed 2 years ago," he said. "Kids called for the funeral, then forgot the number." I smiled. "Mine call when the garbage disposal breaks, or when they think I owe them something." He chuckled. "So, we are the unwanted generation?" "No," I said, surprising even myself. "We're the generation that forgot we were allowed to want something." We sat like that for hours. 2 old strangers who had both been background noise in younger people's stories, now finally center stage in our own. George became my first real friend in years. We started meeting every Wednesday afternoon for tea. He brought cookies, I brought old stories. And somehow, neither of us felt lonely anymore. Days became routines. I woke up early to make cinnamon rolls or banana bread. Some I kept, some I gave away. In the afternoons, I walked along the lake trail. People nodded. Some even stopped to say hello. A little boy once ran up just to ask if I was someone's grandma, and when I said yes, he grinned and gave me a flower. At 75, I had joined a gentle yoga class led by a woman named Teresa, who said age was just a different version of strength. I believed her. I started painting with watercolors every Sunday, laughing at my shaky hands and proud of every wild, uneven blossom I managed to create. My memoir took shape slowly, each page a thread pulled back from the parts of myself I had long tucked away for others' comfort. I had no one to cook for, but I had myself to nourish, and for once, that was enough. One afternoon, George brought chamomile tea and a lemon tart he had made from scratch. We sat on the balcony, the lake sparkling like it had been polished with glass. "I have not seen you frown in weeks," he said. "I have not been told to sit in silence either," I replied. He lifted his teacup. "To freedom," he toasted. I lifted mine too, paused, then said with a smile, "I was denied cake, but now I feast on peace." He laughed, and then we fell quiet, not the awkward kind, but the kind that wraps around two people like a blanket. I remembered that day in the kitchen, my hands reaching for a slice of cake, the one with my name in cursive frosting, Tina's voice like vinegar in honey, the room full of laughter that wasn't mine. And now, here I was, holding a cup of tea, looking over a lake, with someone who saw me, not as a burden, but as a woman still capable of joy. I had been pushed aside, but I had not broken. I had simply moved. It came on a Tuesday, a thick white envelope, embossed with a gold insignia and addressed to my former home in Illinois, not from me, but from my attorney. Inside, a copy of my revised will. Every word of it was deliberate. Every sentence a quiet undoing of what they had once assumed. I left nothing to my children, nothing to my grandchildren, not the savings I had built over 5 decades at the bank, not the condo by the lake, not even my jewelry, the small sentimental pieces they used to ask about after every family gathering. Instead, I donated it all to the assisted living home in Michigan, where I now volunteered twice a week, reading to the blind, organizing crafts, and holding hands with people who had stories but no one to listen. They welcomed me like family, so I gave back, not out of spite, but out of love, finally returned. My attorney said my family called him 4 times in one day. He didn't answer. Tina was the first to explode, online, of course. She wrote a long, frantic post on social media, dripping in wounded ego. My grandmother disinherited us after all we did for her. We let her live with us, we celebrated her, and now she gives everything to strangers? How could she be so cruel? Underneath were dozens of comments. Some agreed with her, others didn't. One stranger replied, "Did she really live with you or under you?" Another, "Old women don't give away love unless it's been taken for granted first." I read it all, quietly, without comment. There were no calls, no apologies. No one came looking for me, not really. I had stopped expecting that long ago. I sat at my desk and pulled out a clean sheet of paper. I wrote, slowly, carefully, more for myself than for anyone else. We may celebrated without me. I planned without them. It was not bitterness, it was clarity. It was the final line of a chapter I had waited too long to close. They had shown me who I was to them. Background noise, a placeholder, someone to dismiss when convenient. Now I had shown them who I had always been. Not a burden, not a prop, but a woman who remembered everything. Who remembered buying Tina's textbooks when her father forgot. Who remembered staying up with fevers, writing checks when their pride got too thin to ask. Who remembered birthdays and allergies and favorite bedtime songs. But more than anything, I remembered how they made me feel when I asked for nothing more than a slice of cake. That night, George brought over a small cake he had baked himself. Chocolate, a little lopsided, covered in powdered sugar, and a few sliced strawberries. "No candles," he said. "Just cake for being alive." We shared it on the balcony. The lake hummed under the moonlight. We did not toast. We did not say much, but I smiled after every bite, not because it was sweet, but because it was mine. My 76th birthday was different. There was no awkward silence, no paper plates on kitchen counters, no children elbowing me aside for cake I had bought, no backhanded jokes, no waiting in a hallway for someone to remember I existed. Instead, I stood in the center of a warm, sunlit room inside the community hall by the lake. Folded chairs filled the space, but no one sat quietly. Everyone moved, laughed, hugged, The smell of cinnamon rolls and tea floated in the air. George wore a green sweater I had once complimented. He brought tulips in a mason jar. Joan, the woman who taught watercolor next door, baked a pecan pie. A group of teenagers I tutored in letter writing class made a giant card with 76 looks good on you in bubble letters across the front. There were no speeches planned, no forced songs, only something I had decided to do for myself. I walked to the little wooden podium in the corner, holding a page torn from my notebook, the one I had started writing in the week I left Illinois. I cleared my throat. Everyone went quiet, and I read. This year I finally learned that dignity isn't like cake. You do not get to slice it for someone else. You do not get to offer someone a bite and take the rest. Dignity is not given, it's claimed. There was silence at first. Then hands met hands in a soft wave of applause, gentle but sure, the kind that said, "We see you." I smiled, folded the paper, and tucked it back into the book. George stepped up beside me and raised a glass of sparkling cider. "To the woman who chose herself," he said. Laughter followed. A few people even wiped their eyes. I did not cry. I had done enough of that. Instead, I walked to the large window overlooking the lake. The late autumn sun shimmered on the water like golden thread being pulled across its surface. Trees flamed in amber and red, their leaves like memory, falling, but beautiful. I leaned against the window frame, and for the first time in decades I felt full, not from the cake or the cider or the sound of my name being spoken without obligation, but from something else. A stillness, a peace, a long overdue sense that I was no longer just counting the days. I was living them, and they were mine. After the guests left and the room returned to silence, I stayed behind. Just me and the folded chairs and the leftover pie. George helped me sweep up confetti. We did not say much, but before he left, he placed a note in my hand. His handwriting was shaky, but careful. "If you ever feel like sharing the view from that lakefront window with someone who also chose peace, I'll bring the coffee." I laughed softly, folded the note, and slipped it into my purse. The sun was setting as I stepped outside. Crisp air kissed my face. I tightened my shawl around my shoulders and looked up. A single leaf spun in the air, landed at my feet, then drifted off again with the breeze. I whispered to no one, but maybe to everything. I was just counting the days until I lived them fully. Thank you for staying with us through the end of Mildred's story. She was never loud. She never demanded anything. She gave quietly, sacrificed quietly, and for years she was dismissed, just as quietly, until one moment changed everything. It was not a scream. It was not a fight. It was a slice of cake denied and a dignity reclaimed. Her journey reminds us of something we often forget in this busy world, that love without respect becomes duty, and silence without recognition becomes grief. Mildred did not disappear. She chose herself. She stopped, waiting to be invited to the table. She built her own. She stopped whispering her worth in the dark. She began to live it out loud in the open and on her own terms. And isn't that what we all hope for? Not just to survive our later years, but to live them with meaning, with peace, and with pride. At Grandma True Stories, we tell these stories because they matter. Because too many women like Mildred have been made to feel like they take up space. Too many grandmothers have been forgotten in the corners of their own homes. Too many sacrifices have been erased. Too many birthdays have gone uncelebrated. Too many voices have been silenced. But not here. Here, every wrinkle holds a memory. Every scar has a story. Every woman deserves to be heard. So if you felt something today, if Mildred reminded you of someone you know, or maybe even of yourself, then we invite you to stay. Subscribe to Grandma True Stories and be part of a community that listens, honors, and uplifts. Because revenge doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers, "You didn't see me." But now the world will. And sometimes healing doesn't come in the form of apologies. It comes in the form of peace, by a quiet lake, a cup of tea, and a new chapter written on your own. We'll be here to share the next one with you. Until then, take care of your elders, listen closely to their silences, and never, ever, underestimate the strength of a woman who has nothing left to prove. Let us know in the comments, what would you do if you were Mildred? And if you believe dignity has no expiration date, hit subscribe. See you in the next story.